Well, hello and welcome. I'm glad that you're here with us today as we continue our chronological read through of the Bible. As we ended our reading yesterday, the uh, the time was clearly near for Israel to enter into the promised land. Moses' final days are coming up. They're close. A new leader has been appointed, as well as a new way of learning God's will. So Moses now turns his attention to the matter of the various offerings that are to be made by Israel as a people. You might say that we spend some time now looking at the worship life of the people of Israel. God is laying out parameters for this life of worship. You're going to read about daily offerings, Sabbath offerings, monthly offerings, Passover offerings, offerings for the Feast of Weeks, offerings for the Feast of Trumpets, offerings for the Day of Atonement, offerings for the Feast of Booths. Notice that these offerings happen day after day, week after week, month after month, and year after year. And these offerings are costly. So, a total of 70 bulls are sacrificed in the series of offerings commanded for the Feast of Weeks. It's, it's clear that the vehicle of atonement, by all of these offerings, it's clear that the vehicle of atonement is blood. For death is the wage of sin. As a matter of fact, Hebrews 9, verse 22 looks back on these offerings and reminds us that without the shedding of blood, there is no forgiveness. Still, the blood of these sacrifices must be repeated over and over again because they point to that one sacrifice that brings atonement for all sin, the sacrifice of Jesus on the cross. His blood alone atones for all sin for all time. Now, as you read, notice that these are burnt offerings. In other words, they're consumed entirely by the fire on the altar. None of these offerings that we are going to read about right now are set aside for food for the priests or anybody like that. It's a constant reminder. This consumption, total consumption of the offering on the altar is a constant reminder that we're to commit ourselves totally to God, that nothing is to be held back. Also notice that these offerings are cumulative. The daily offering is given every day, regardless of whatever other sacrifices are prescribed for that particular day. Having gone through these various offerings, Moses then turns to the subject of voluntary vows. Now, vows are obligations that the people would voluntarily take on themselves to serve God, in addition to whatever it is that God has commanded. The principle that we see in action as Moses talks about this is that no one needs to take such a vow, but if someone does, they have to take it seriously, and they absolutely must do what they have said. After all, they've made a vow, a promise to the Lord. Now, the head of the household was responsible for vows made by members of that particular household. Whether the head of that household was a man or his widow or a divorced woman who was in charge of her household, that person was responsible for those. The rules about vows acknowledge that someone in the household might make a vow that jeopardizes the household. So the leader of the household has the right to invalidate the vow when they first hear of it, if they feel that that is necessary. Yet, even for such household members, a vow is a serious commitment because a vow is assumed to be valid unless it is explicitly invalidated by the head of the household when they first hear of it. I suppose today's reading, as you look at it, may seem rather technical, um, but notice the richness of the lessons that it provides. The offerings commanded by God are very costly, yet even then, provision is made for additional offerings beyond for those who desire to show God their love, to express their thankfulness to God, even beyond the commanded offerings. The commanded offerings provided a constant reminder of God's mercy, God's grace, God's provisions. And the offerings above and beyond, in other words, the offerings associated with vows, are not to be taken lightly. You see, God speaks only the truth, and God's word accomplishes what it says. Well, We're created in God's image. The same is expected of us, that we speak only in wisdom, in the wisdom of truth, and that we do what we say we will do. Well, as always, I pray that your reading is edifying to you, that you're growing, that you're learning. May God be with you and bless you. I look forward to gathering with you again tomorrow.